Be talking about the community resiliency model, what it is, the strategies that are taught, the biological process, the resiliency zone, being in that zone, and also experiencing highs and lows, and then just simply the parasympathetic and the sympathetic part of the nervous system and how that makes us feel. So, what is community resiliency model, also known as CRIM? It is to create resiliency informed and trauma informed to individuals and communities. Um, so, what is that? Basically, teaching wellness skills to one person at a time, but also one community at a time. And so within this model, there's also the resiliency zone. And what the resiliency zone is a state of mind where your body, mind, and soul is just fine. It's a state of mind where you're able to handle the stresses that occur in your life. But within the resiliency zone, there's also highs and lows, which we will go into a little bit later. But we also are going to be talking about those wellness skills that I was talking about, and there's 6 of them. So the first one is tracking, resourcing, grounding, gesturing, and spontaneous movement. The help now, reset now, and then the shift and stay. So these are the 6 skills that will be taught within the model to the people and the community. Community resiliency model focuses on resetting the balance of the nervous system, which is the two different parasympathetic and sympathetic. It's resetting that back to balance. And while doing that, we have the biological process. And what the biological process is, it's when a trauma or highly stressful event occurs in somebody's life, which causes them to be afraid. And it causes them to be afraid of even the smallest things. So even the smallest things can trigger or stress somebody out. So for example, getting up in the morning. It's something that you do every single day, but after a traumatic event occurs, getting up in the morning can be very hard, and it can be it can cause an individual to not know what to do. And then individual not knowing how to handle that, it can cause them to move out of the resiliency zone and going into either a high zone or the low zone. And so the high zone would be experiencing anxious or nervousness, whereas the low zone is feeling more of a sadness. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. And then again, just touching up on the difficulties, it can cause adults or even children to have many difficulties throughout their life by this trauma. So the resiliency zone, which is right here, it's the state of well-being in mind, body, and spirit. And again, this is when you are able to handle those stresses in life that occur. It doesn't cause you to it can cause you to be angry, it can cause you to be sad, but it doesn't cause you to a point where it's gonna put you in a mood where you cannot do anything. So you can still experience those feelings within the resiliency zone, but you're just able to handle it. So with being in the high zone, you're gonna feel more irritable, you're gonna feel angry, you're gonna feel anxious, you can have angry outbursts, you can feel pain. Whereas here in the low zone, you're going to feel exhaustion, you're going to feel depression, you're going to feel sadness, isolated, numbness. And when you're stuck in those zones, it can be really hard to get out of if you aren't very familiar with some skills or coping methods that can help you. The nervous system. So we want to reset the balance of the nervous system. And we have 2 things, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And within the sympathetic, it prepares for action. So this is the fight or flight response that many people are familiar with. And within here, this controls your organs during a time of stress. So you could be feeling a faster heartbeat. You can be feeling your brain activity is increased. Whereas the parasympathetic here, it prepares for rest. So what it is it controls the body during the rest, also known as rest and digest. And your brain activity is decreased. You have a slower heart rate, and it can just be um, just different feeling. And why is this important? Why do we need to know the difference between the two? Because we want to have a healthy balance between the both. So it is okay to feel these symptoms back and forth, because sometimes you can feel your heartbeat going fast, but it could be something good. You can be excited. It can be a good feeling. So it doesn't always have to be negative. But we want to make sure that we have a healthy balance between them both. We also want to be able to recognize the differences. So when we're able to recognize the difference between how we're feeling, why we're feeling that way, it's a little bit easier for us to come back into this resiliency zone. So we want to be able to know what feelings that we have, why we're feeling that way, and how it ties into the trauma that was experienced. So this is the community resiliency model, and just summary, we talked about what it is. We talked about the resiliency zone between the highs and the lows, and being in the state of mind where we want to all be. We talked about the biological process and how it makes somebody feel. We discussed the feelings that you feel when you're within the two different zones. And then we discussed the nervous system and how we want to reset the balance back to a neutral state of mind. And we discussed between preparing for action or as preparing for rest, and what the differences are, and the symptoms and feelings that people go through between both of them when experiencing that. Thank you.